share my screen. Thank you, Alan, for this event, for organizing this.
Thank you, Chen.
So let me share my screen. Let me know you can see it. All right. So good afternoon, good evening, everyone. Thank you again for this opportunity for me to be able to present, and thank you for taking the time. So we have some folks from India, we have some folks from Japan here in Tokyo, and so for today, I'll be talking about delivering hyper automation solutions. So just to give a quick introduction of myself. So I am Joey Chan. I'm a proud husband and father to a 6-year-old and 4-year-old girls. We're actually traveling here in Tokyo right now and was given this opportunity to actually speak in the MuleSoft Meetup. I'm also the founder and technical architect at Cloud Jedi Solutions. We're also the #1 rated developer on the App Exchange, and things changed there, so you may not be able to see that anymore. I'm also 34 times Salesforce and MuleSoft certified architect, and I'm actually one of the well-architected ambassador. So for those that are from the Salesforce realm, so you may be familiar with the well-architected principles, and I'm actually one of the ambassadors that can deliver those workshops. I'm also one of the organizers of Philippines Dreamin' and Southeast Asia Dreamin'. For those that are not aware, this is actually a community organized conference based in the Philippines, focusing on Salesforce, MuleSoft, and all of the related technologies, right? And, and on top of that, I'm also what we call a Salesforce MVP and a MuleSoft ambassador. So I represent both Salesforce and MuleSoft in the different speaking engagements. And also, for fun fact for those that aren't aware, there's currently four of us right now around the world. That's both a Salesforce MVP and a MuleSoft ambassador. With that, the agenda for today is I'll be talking about all of these in a high level because we actually don't have that much time to dig into each product individually. So what I'll be talking about is first is what is hyper automation. Number two is why should you even care? And third is what are the different Salesforce and MuleSoft solutions that's available to help with our hyper automation and how it's actually meant to work together in order to achieve hyper automation and how you can learn more. That first one is question is anybody familiar with what is hyper automation? Feel free to unmute yourself or have heard of it. Anyone?
I think no
Want
one.
to,
Yeah.
want to share?
No, I don't know.
No one?
Yeah.
Any ideas? What is hyper automation?
RPA, Joe.
Making most of the systems. So
Making the most out of the systems, yes?
yeah, so yeah, I think hyper automation pertains to um, making most of the process automated.
Mhm.
So it's likely related to robotics process or something. Yeah, most of the process are being automated.
Yes. So one of the audience answer here is making the whole process automated, specifically pertaining to RPA, specifically robotic process automation. But take note that's just one part of it. So the official definition by Gartner is actually this one. So it is a business-driven, disciplined approach that organizations use to rapidly identify, vet, and automate as many business and IT processes as possible. One of the key points here is it's actually business-driven in that it's automating as many business processes as possible. So it could be combining multiple different processes, multiple different tools. And for the next slide, it's actually combining many of these, and if not all of it, actually. So it's actually the orchestrated use of AI. So for some of you, you may have already used a lot of the newer advancement in AI since last year. So we have, for example, ChatGPT. We have other technologies from Google. So there's quite a lot of um, improvements and a lot of developments recently on AI. And learning has been there for a while now, but things are getting updated. And then here, anybody familiar with event-driven software architecture?
Quite familiar. We've been using this for some time. Event-driven means it's like you are waiting for an event to happen, and then there's a trigger. So
Yes.
it's most likely a trigger based. So it most of the time it listens to that publisher or anything that is trigger based. So
Yes.
and then yeah, delivering some other delivering messages into multiple
Right.
platforms.
So, because we're actually a MuleSoft Meetup, many of you should be already quite familiar with the event-driven software architecture, right? So we have the MuleSoft as a really good example of the application of that. So in a way, we're actually listening for events and then taking action based on that specific event. And then we also have RPA, robotic process automation. For those that aren't aware of this specific term, it doesn't refer to physical robots that does a lot of let's say something that you would see in Amazon wherein it's packing the different boxes. It's not that. It's not the one that you see in the industrial implementations, building uh, different furnitures, things like that. This is actually referring to software robots, meaning if you're talking about certain automation that needs to happen in a software, for example, as simple as being able to log into a system. Imagine those really old Windows applications that doesn't have an API. You could actually automate that specific process using RPA. And then, for example, first part you need is, for example, being able to log in, right? So what it would do is start looking for that username field, find that label, and then find the next input field and enter the details. Next one is the password, and then fill in the password and then click on submit. That's just the first part. And it can do so many things. And it basically unlocks different capabilities, especially for legacy systems, those that doesn't have an API. Uh, we won't be touching on the others. So there's also that part about business process management, IBPMS, and integration platform as service. This is, of course, MuleSoft is another example of this. We also have different tools like low code and no code tools, right? We'll go through some of them today. And we also have packaged software and other types of decision and process and task automation tools, right? So first one, what is the problem right now in IT? So anybody of you have experienced a lot of stress because there's so much business demands? Yes.
Yeah.
I think there's a lot of there's a lot of there's a lot of problems in terms of connecting different software. Specifically, you need to engage a lot of IT developers
Mhm.
before. So it's a pain point in delivering some of solutions because you need to because you need to be more technical and you need more technical people to help you at integrating systems.
Yes. So that's the big part, right? So there's so much business demands now. There's so much expectations, so much need for automation. Now, of course, with AI advancements, there's so many new things to learn, right? We also have a lot of different cloud and different SaaS applications. There's also a big need for different mobile capabilities and analytics. The problem there is the IT typically isn't necessarily growing a lot in order to cover that pace, right? They only have so much capacity, and the problem there is it actually is causing what we call a transformation delivery gap. So, what does this mean, right? So, based on the statistics, we have 82% of businesses that say that they actually need easy access to data and IT capabilities. And the problem there is only 37% of organizations that they actually have the technology and skill to keep pace. So what do we do then, right? How do we actually empower people in order to deliver all of these demands? So Number one is, why should you actually even care about all of these, right? So number one is, of course, improve productivity, right? This is what most businesses are really looking for. It's they're looking forward to how they can actually maintain the same level of staff, but be able to do a lot more, whether to help the business increase their revenue, or they could save on costs, right? But at the end of the day, they want to be able to improve a lot in terms of the productivity. And number two is, question is, how can we actually deliver business value faster, right? There's so many demands. How do we then connect different multiple systems to be able to help the management decide better in terms of how they can focus on certain parts of the business, so that they have the proper data to make decisions on. And then, of course, for many of you that's joining here today, this is actually going to help you in terms of your career advantage. Right now, um, because for myself, I'm actually focusing on both Salesforce and MuleSoft. There's actually quite a lot of people that are already really good at MuleSoft in itself, the Anypoint platform, really deep in that platform, right? And there's, on the other side of the coin, there's also Salesforce expertise that's already quite deep for many people. But if you think about it, there's not that many people that actually know both, that are deep enough to actually understand how they're actually meant to work together. Most of the time, for example, if you're working for a large, for example, SI, the typical challenge is that you're quite isolated. It's either you're a Salesforce developer, Salesforce architect, or you're either, or you're also a MuleSoft developer or an architect there. It's quite rare for you to move from one side to the other. But this is actually an opportunity for you to understand what it's capable of and what hyper automation solutions there are. All right. First question is, for those that are familiar with Salesforce, what do we use for automation in Salesforce? Referring to low code. So we have an answer here, right? So we actually have Salesforce flows for the low code option for building automations within Salesforce. For the pro code, you have triggers, right? And there are a lot of peripheral automations, but in general, these are the basics, right? So it really provides all of the what we need, if not most of what we need for Salesforce automation. It's a no code solutions, and it's actually something that you could use a lot, especially if you're building a screen-based process. Meaning, if you've seen, let's say, a wizard type of form wherein you have 10 steps or 5 steps. So it's a really good and fast way for you to develop applications that can gather information in step one, step two, upload certain documents, step three is doing certain validation, even doing API calls to third party. All right. Now, the next question is, there are certain integrations that Salesforce admins and non-technical people can use, right? So how do we actually empower the non-technical, specifically those that doesn't, let's say, know Salesforce development, or doesn't want, or doesn't know how to code? So we actually have a solution within that called MuleSoft Composer. For those that are not familiar with this, so it's actually the uh, I would say the low-code integration tool. So within MuleSoft Composer, for those that want to understand the backend, it's actually based on Cloud Hub 2.0. And each MuleSoft Composer instance is actually linked to only one production org, meaning there's no concept of a sandbox in MuleSoft Composer. The reason for that is actually because this is really meant towards admins, business people. This is really, I would say, a lot simplified compared to those what you could see in any point platform. And there's actually a really good reason for that, right? We want to lower the barrier to entry for people to be able to create integrations. So if you're you've tried building simple integrations using Zapier or Make.com, this is actually something quite similar. And for those that are using or have used Salesforce flows, this is also something that you could actually use easily. It's actually quite simple. Unfortunately, we won't have that much time for today to give you a demo of this, but I also have several videos uploaded on YouTube on this specific topic. There's actually around 30 standard connectors already. And for example, I'll be showing to you a list of different connectors later on. But if you need certain connectors that are not available, there's still an option of being able to define your own using REST endpoints. And this is something very crucial here. This is something that non-developers, even business users that doesn't necessarily have the technical knowledge, should be able to use. All you have to do is define what's the trigger point. It could be something that's scheduled, something that you run every day at a certain time of the day, or it could be something that's based on an event. For example, let's say a lead gets created in Salesforce. What do you want to happen? You want to, for example, send an SMS using Twilio or send a phone call to someone, depending on what's the need, right? So take note, there's around 30 connectors now. So this one's outdated. So we actually have connections with some of the popular applications. So we have NetSuite, we have Marketing Cloud, we have Jira. So you can, in a way, send messages depending on certain conditions. And take note, it doesn't necessarily have to originate within Salesforce. You could have certain things happen. For example, many companies are using, for example, Google Sheets for their forms, right? So you have a Google Sheet, and then you also have a Google form um, that you then send out to people to fill out. And then one of the capabilities here is that, for example, as soon as somebody submits a form, within that goes into that Google Sheet as a new entry. And then based on that, you can do certain things. For example, you could create a new record in Salesforce, or you could also create, let's say, a new calendar entry in Google Calendar. There's so many ways for you to actually use this in combination, and it's all low code. And different capabilities, like for example, I've seen use cases. There are still companies that receive invoices via email. So one of the ways they could automate this is, for example, they could have a connector for Gmail that would then listen for incoming emails that has a certain format. And then within that, it could take a look at, hey, do we have an attachment? And then they could take things further here and use that RPA capability to do that. But I'll be talking about that later on. But in a way, there's so many things that you can do with Composer, with all of these connectors, and provide data to other places and make certain actions. And one key thing to take note, this is actually one possible use case wherein we can have what we call org-to-org integrations. Are anyone familiar with that? Yes? No?
Yeah. Org to org.
Org-to-org, yes.
Yeah.
So in case where you're trying to integrate with systems that doesn't have a default connector or standard connector, there's still that option of using the HTTP connector. One key important thing here is that it has to be a REST API. If it's a SOAP API, it won't be supported. So something to take note of. So who is it for? To be honest, it's really for everyone. So typically, it's really targeted for Salesforce administrators. Even actually end users can actually use this, right? So if you're a Salesforce admin, this is something that you could use to build integrations for yourself. If you're a Salesforce architect, this is another tool in your arsenal for you to understand what are the different options to integrate different systems. Even though this is something low code, but at the same time, this is something very accessible. So it really depends on the use case that you have, but this is something important to know about. Even Salesforce developers can actually leverage this. Before, I would say around 10 plus years ago, a lot of the simple integrations actually needed to be coded. Not anymore. There's so many low-code tools out there that can actually help with building simple point-to-point integrations. Let's say for Salesforce marketers, can actually help a lot too, right? If you want certain actions that should happen, let's say if you have Marketing Cloud in Salesforce, there's so many more options for you to use rather than just those two, right? So you could, for example, integrate it with Slack, with Twilio, all of the different capabilities. And even for Salesforce consultants, right? This is something that they can actually build themselves as a part of a solution. And then next product on the list here is that what if there is no API or if we are dealing with legacy system? So I've actually mentioned this earlier. So we're actually talking about RPA. So it actually stands for robotic process automation. So what this means is that imagine, as I mentioned earlier, we actually have a software robot that would do the work for you. Meaning, especially for, let's say, industries that are quite slow to adapt to new technologies. We could be seeing, for example, really traditional banks. Some may not have certain APIs with what they have. Some even still have COBOL within their systems, right? Some are quite old that may not make sense to upgrade right now for them. So there's still a way for us to unlock the different capabilities of that system. It's actually through RPA if it doesn't have an API. It's what we call a UI-based automation, meaning if you're a person, imagine a person that needs to go to that system to log in, to search for a certain record, meaning, let's say, they have some data in Salesforce and they have some data in another system. If they want to be able to search for certain information, so let's say they will type the first name and last name, or even the email, and then search for it there, and then manually search for the data, and then possibly copy and paste. Those certain things, as long as it's something that's predictable and something that happens often, it's actually something that's a good candidate for MuleSoft RPA, mainly because we want to eliminate that human intervention. We want to be able to automate that process of going to that system, finding the details that we need, searching for things. Take note, typically, these are multiple steps, right? So we want to limit the human involvement and want to be able to make this scalable, right? What if you're doing that, let's say, 100 times a day, a few hundred times a day? You could actually have multiple bots running and using that system. And then big part of it is being able to interact with desktop-based applications, especially the older ones, right? Being able to open emails, open spreadsheets, even file systems. This is something that you can do, right? It can actually also read data from image and PDF files. So if you're doing OCR, especially, for example, in the example that I gave earlier, let's say if we have a spreadsheet or let's say an invoice sent as a PDF file, there are ways for us to actually read that PDF file and be able to send that to other systems. All right. What if I still cannot do with any of the previous tools, right? So I've already mentioned MuleSoft Composer and RPA. Now, this is something for, of course, the MuleSoft specialists here. We also have the Anypoint platform. I would say it's the granddaddy of all of the different integrations, because I would say it has the capability to do most of what it needs, right? So most of the integration use cases, especially the really complicated ones, let's say if you need to handle hundreds, if not thousands of transactions per second, this is the tool that you would be using to build those, because it has the capability to do batching, being able to do bulk updates, a lot of the complex processing that you would need. And you also have a lot more control in terms of the user interface, being able to reuse a lot of the different capabilities. And for the most part, The challenge, of course, here is that there's a much higher learning curve. Not everyone would necessarily be a MuleSoft developer or MuleSoft architect, right? So a big part of it is understanding when it matters to use which tools. So, like I mentioned, we have complex integration needs, and a lot of it is understanding um, when do you want to leverage the capabilities of your Salesforce admins, your consultants, in being able to build integrations themselves rather than having to wait for, let's say, developer and MuleSoft architects to be able to build really simple integrations, right? It doesn't necessarily make sense to have to build everything in any point platform. All right. Now we actually go to this part wherein I'll be talking about MuleSoft Automation Suite. So um, Salesforce and MuleSoft actually has a package that combines all of these tools together in one package. So we have the MuleSoft Composer, MuleSoft RPA, and Anypoint. And each of these actually has a different audience, right? So if you're building really simple applications, let's say you're combining data from NetSuite or Jira and Salesforce, especially if it's a really simple use case and the data volume isn't a lot, I would actually encourage you to take a look at MuleSoft Composer first. And take note, this is something that you will be able to leverage if you're using Salesforce flows too. And then we also have RPA. It's also, I would say, low code, but still technical, right? There's also a need to actually understand how to deal with the different RPA manager, how do you deal with the recorder, the builder. So I would say this is still a niche product because a lot of it's understanding how do you automate human tasks. Of course, more and more applications are now um, being developed with API in mind, especially now we're in 2024. But at the same time, you'll be surprised. There's still quite a number of legacy applications out there that's still running, especially for larger organizations. This is still something that's needed. And we also have the endpoint platform building on top of um, the platform using Anypoint Studio, right? Any questions so far?
So far, so good.
All right. Thank you. So the question is, how are these meant to work together, right? So this is a quick diagram of how a sample application could work. So we have different connectors that we have for MuleSoft Composer, right? So we have Gmail, we have Salesforce. Let's say depending on, let's say a new contact or a new lead being created, we could trigger certain actions to happen. So the use case that I mentioned earlier, we could have an email that comes in through Gmail. MuleSoft can then read that. It goes here and then checking, hey, does this have an attachment? If yes, it can then send it to RPA, look at that specific attachment, that PDF invoice, read it, understand what it does, right? So we have RPA bot there that are running. And then using that data, or for example, you could also use that specific PDF. Let's say if you want to use a third party, like for example, Amazon has a certain um, service that allows you to upload, let's say, a PDF file, and the name is Amazon Text Extract. It can actually give you the data in JSON format, and you can actually use any point platform to then process that and then send it to whatever other systems that it needs to go through. So it could be going back to Composer. It could be um, also sending it to any other data point, right? And one very important thing here is that whenever you're creating a new RPA process, this is also something that will be published in the Endpoint Exchange. That means if you're building APIs on the Endpoint platform, you can then leverage that RPA bot as an API. meaning just pass in the data, and it can actually do additional processing that you need based on that. So for example, I want to get the data from invoice number 12345. You could use any point platform to actually request data using RPA and then get the data back. And the big part of it is actually understanding how all of these are meant to work together. And on top of that, it's also understanding how it actually goes well with the rest of the Salesforce ecosystem, right? Remember, we talked about the Salesforce flows earlier. We also have the capability within Salesforce flows to be able to use the endpoint exchange, to be able to see all of the different APIs within MuleSoft, right? So for example, you have a process. For example, in this case, you have a screen flow that gets the data on order updates. If the user agrees, no, then send an email. If yes, you can then call MuleSoft APIs within the endpoint exchange. And all of these are really, I would say, being combined in order to help with the hyper automation solutions, right? Remember, the challenge is, of course, we can always ask the MuleSoft developers and architects to do all of it, right? The challenge there is there's so much demands from the business. The question is, how do we empower them to be able to do certain business processes, business integrations themselves without having to bother these, right? And a big part of it is actually understanding how we have all of the different capabilities on the Salesforce side. For example, the sales, service, marketing, the commerce, all of these below are meant to be able to communicate with each other using this MuleSoft automation, right? Any questions so far? Just making sure. Feel free to just leave your questions in the chat window. And yet, all right. So I'll just play a quick video. I'm not actually sure if this will share the audio, but let me share it again. Hold on. Share. Let me know if you can hear.
Today, every experience you create for customers, employees, and partners requires data and orchestration across all of your systems. What if everyone could unlock data, automate processes, and create experiences that wow your customers? MuleSoft is the how behind the wow. Let's start with automation. Automation is so much more than bots and workflows. It's about freeing up time for employees to focus on higher value work. For business teams that need to automate processes using clicks, not code, there is MuleSoft Composer. It comes with out-of-the-box connectors to systems like Salesforce, NetSuite, Tableau, Slack, and more. Plus, it's built right into Salesforce. But what about automating those legacy and hard-to-reach systems that don't have APIs? MuleSoft RPA uses the power of bots to automate any UI interaction, capture data from documents, and take action in any system. Next, with MuleSoft, you can unlock and integrate data from any system to drive connected experiences. With MuleSoft Anypoint Platform, a unified solution for APIs and integration, IT teams can securely connect data from any system, whether it lives in the cloud or in legacy on-premises systems. Plus, with built-in monitoring and management, you can have a single pane of glass into the status of your integrations and APIs, with customizable dashboards and easy-to-use alerts. And finally, we make it possible for you to deliver business outcomes faster. We've built a marketplace of plug-and-play connectors, templates, and accelerators so you can leverage industry best practices and get started today. With MuleSoft, you can automate anything and empower everyone. To learn more about transforming your business with MuleSoft, visit us online.
I can also share the presentation later on if anybody's interested here. So you could watch more. But you'll notice here, let me just give a quick um, detail in terms of what you just saw. It might be too fast for some of you. So this is actually a good example of implementation using MuleSoft Composer. You'll notice that it's basically quite similar to Salesforce flows. All you have to do is select the different actions, and then based on that, do certain actions. So in this case, it's listening for a new issue in Jira, and then based on this, it will then just post a message on Slack. It's also doing an add user and then updating certain records within Salesforce. And this is something, take note, that can be done within minutes. So you could actually have a simple business process built within 30 minutes, including testing, right? And this is something really meant to empower people to be able to build things without necessarily having to bug IT all the time. And in this case, this is the flow. These are the different system events that it has um, connectors to. And take note, there are different connectors for different, let's say, events and actions. So there's a big difference between what you are listening to and the actions that you can take. So there's actually the documentation there. And then depending on certain uh, scheduled events, it could be daily, it could be something that you want to happen on a certain time of the day. So, and then as I mentioned earlier, you'll notice this one's really old school, right? You'll be surprised. There's still quite a lot of applications that are still using this, unfortunately. So this is one way to leverage those applications and being able to build things on top of it, especially with API. We want to be able to unlock the data that's stored there. So RPA is one way to do it. And that's about it. And then question is, how can you actually learn more? For those that have sponsors there with your company, you could consider the instructor-led course being offered by Salesforce. So building a Salesforce hyper-automation solutions with MuleSoft. Um, and the other one is actually using self-paced, using hyper-automation certification. The key thing about this one is that it's actually still really hard to get access to, specifically MuleSoft RPA. But if you were to take this instructor-led course, they actually give it to you for a certain period. So including MuleSoft Composer. This is actually a big challenge for many people in terms of learning the different tools, is because unlike Salesforce, wherein you could easily provision a new Salesforce org. In this case, it's not as easy. It's actually really hard. And that's one key thing. If you really are interested in this is actually one of the ways you could do that. Of course, the alternate is having your company buy the solution. So that's probably something that's harder depending on where you're coming from. And then another one is there's actually I believe it's now called a Salesforce certified hyper automation specialist. So this is actually not necessarily a new one. I would say it's about 1 year old around that time. But the key part here is that it actually talks about what we just talked about earlier, plus more. So there's actually quite a lot of different components here. You actually need to understand the endpoint platform, the endpoint exchange, the MuleSoft RPA, the MuleSoft Composer, along with capabilities within the Salesforce, specifically the Flow Orchestrator, the Salesforce Flows, and the Einstein bot. So this is what I'm talking about, and I mentioned earlier that it's quite hard because many company, especially for large SIs, you're actually bred either as a MuleSoft specialist or Salesforce specialist, right? But this specific certification actually talks about both Salesforce and MuleSoft capabilities. That's why I would say this is a certification that I haven't seen that many people have. So if you're looking forward to something that could help you in terms of your career advantage, this is something that's actually, I would say, for me personally, is worth investing time on, because there's still not that many people that have this and also know all the other products, right? So if you want to learn more about these two products, so specifically Composer and RPA, feel free to scan this QR code. And I can also share this specific presentation for you to click on later on. And with that, any questions? And of course, I really appreciate connect with me on LinkedIn. I can also share that link. So here it is, in case anybody wants to connect.
The connector in use of Composer are,
Yes, we have a question here. Go ahead.
is it the same as how you authenticate the connector in any platform?
It
Like,
doesn't use this. It doesn't necessarily use the same connector, but it's based on that. And all of these are connectors that MuleSoft built themselves.
So it's different authentication. Like for example, if you are working uh, let's say you're working on Stripe connector,
Mhm.
the authentication is the same, or
Well, technically, the authentication is being provided by Stripe, right? So it's the API.
API key.
So if you're asking about how they communicate with Stripe,
Yeah.
technically it's the same. But if you're talking about the connector that's available, the endpoint and the composer, it's actually different. They built something separate for that. But I'm guessing it's also still based on that, right? Because it's using Cloud Hub 2.0 in the backend. Any other questions? This is just a really high level, since we actually don't have that much time to go through all of the products and all of the demo. And if you want to check, I've actually shared several presentations
Is there a
about.
way to
So,
upgrade the fields of composer?
so I've shared a couple of different presentations there. If you want to learn more,
Yeah.
No, not displayed. No.
sorry. Let me share my window again. I'll share the entire screen. So just search for Rose Composer Joey Chan. So I presented these in different places. So feel free to check it out if you want to learn more about Composer. Right? Any other questions? Appreciate the time. Feel free to connect from the link. Anything else?
Okay. Thank you very much, everyone. If there's no other questions, we will end this session today. Thank you all for your listening. Thank you, Chan. Thank you very much.
Yep. Appreciate.
Excellent one.
Thank
Very
you.
good.
Appreciate
Thank you.
Alan, of course, for
Thank you.
hosting this one. And thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Appreciate it. All right. Bye.
All right. Bye bye.